Hello again. I've been talking the last few videos about the mind turning reflections, the four reminders. And I've talked about three of them. So the first one was the preciousness of human birth, the second was impermanence, and the third, karma, the law of karma. And today I've got Bodhivajra with me. I thought we'd have a chat about samsara. So the fourth one is the defects of samsara, the defects of conditioned world. So the first thing to say really is that part of the conditioned world, there's nothing we can do anything about, because our past lives or our past karma has brought us to have a human birth, and the nature of the human birth is, of course, the three lakshanas. So maybe that's a good starting point, really, to say, just in very briefly, maybe about the three lakshanas. So that's reality, isn't it? That's how things actually are, because we have a human birth and because of conditionality.
Yeah, you could say that samsara is a sort of objectification of mental states, which comes about through conditioning, or it's an expression of the conditioned. And the lakshanas are the marks of conditioned existence. So when we say we find ourselves in samsara, or cycling around the states of samsara, we're experiencing the lakshanas, the way things are, the three marks of conditioned existence, which are impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or dukkha, and insubstantiality.
So I did say a bit about that on previous videos, but a lot of samsara is much more to do with our own mind, isn't it? And how we orientate ourselves towards life. The fact that we operate from a state of ignorance.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to misconstrue samsara as being a place or a realm, something like that. And I remember once at the end of a class at the Buddhist Centre, as someone who was about to leave said, "Right, I'm off back out into samsara now." And I said, "Well, hang on a minute, samsara is no more out there than it is in here. Physically speaking, geographically speaking, doesn't matter where you are, it's your states of mind that determine whether you experience samsara or nirvana. And most of the time we experience things, we experience the world or whatever, through a deluded lens, a deluded framework. We think that things are permanent, whereas in fact we think that things are permanent, whereas in fact they're impermanent. And we think that we have a substantial essence, self-being, and we impute that onto all other things and beings as well. Whereas in fact the lakshanas say, no, beings, things, dharmas are insubstantial. They do not have this inherent self-being. And also we expect things to be satisfactory, or we hope for things to always satisfy us, to give us lasting satisfaction.
So that's part of the delusion, isn't it?
Yeah. But actually, as the lakshanas say, things are unsatisfactory. So that therein is the delusion, as Vajragupta says.
Yeah. So sometimes we recite verses around the four reminders, don't we? And I was very struck by the last part of one particular version, which says, owing to greed, hatred and delusion, sentient beings revolve in the realms of man, gods, animals, ghosts and hell beings, just like the turning of a potter's wheel. Beings are for a long time on fire with the suffering of old age and disease. There is no one to rescue them from that misery. What is the cause of so much suffering? It's because transmigrating beings do not understand conditioned existence, and they revolve just like a bee buzzing round and round a pot. I think that's a very strong image, that bee buzzing round and round a pot. You know, if it's describing how we respond in life, doing the same, making the same mistakes, repeating our habits in ways that they just don't serve us.
Well, yes, we tend to have particular things that we revolve around, don't we? Like the bee around the pot, you know, particular things that that we crave, or particular things that we are angry about, particular things we're anxious about, and we go round and round them. You know, we follow those circular paths all of the time, most of the time.
So we're driven by habit, and when we practice the Dharma, in a way, we're trying to get to know our habits, aren't we? And stepping back from them, seeing how habitual perhaps our behaviour is and that it isn't serving us.
Well, that's why Dharma practice is not easy or straightforward, because we all get a sense, we all know quite clearly what is beneficial to us and what isn't. But because our habits are so strong, we very often tend to follow the habits. We don't always have the strength to not follow the habitual tendencies. But with Dharma practice, we start to recognise what our habits are, what it is that we're revolving around all the time, like the bee around the pot. We get to recognise that what's in the pot actually isn't satisfying, that it might give us a brief hit of something, but then we just crave it again. So we learn over time not to do it, but it takes a long time.
It does. And of course we find these 6 realms on the image of the wheel of life. And the wheel of life, we haven't got time to go into those images now, but I was thinking about the outer circle of the wheel of life, where we have the Nidana chain, and the importance, the real significance of that gap that we can find, we can look for between feeling and craving. So because we come in contact with the world through our senses, inevitably we have feelings, and those feelings, as we know, are pleasant, painful or neutral. But there's an opportunity before we respond, or react rather, to those feelings with craving. There's an opportunity to find a bit of space. And I think meditation really, it's one of the main advantages of meditation, that we're slowed down in a way and have a chance to find that gap.
Yeah, I think through practice we are able to increase the length of the gap, because what happens without any awareness is that the gap happens so quickly that we just don't notice it. Whereas when we meditate, I suppose everything slows down a bit when we meditate, doesn't it? Our body slows down, our thoughts slow down, and then when we come to be in the gap, we have a bit more space then in which we can make a considered choice.
That can be in quite a basic way, can't it? Let's say you have an itch and you've just found yourself in a lovely, still, quiet, meditative state, but this itch comes up. Now you could just react and scratch it, or you could wait. You could notice, I have an itch, and perhaps the itch will go. It's almost like not just being habitual, not just responding without awareness, because often if we scratch an itch, we haven't even thought, I want to scratch the itch. We've just done it before we've even thought about it.
Yeah, and that's true, of course, for more serious things than just itches, isn't it? You know, some things we do have much more serious consequences, and I guess, you know, if we follow particular paths in our lives, we know with experience, we know that some paths are really good for us and other paths are not good for us at all, and we know that more suffering will come if we choose those latter ones. So you get to a point where you do actually, you are actually faced with the choice, well, do I follow this path, even though I know it will lead me to suffering, or do I follow this other path, which will not lead me to suffering? I think it was Ajahn Chah who talked about two types of suffering: the suffering that leads to more suffering and the suffering that leads to no suffering. So when you make the unskillful choice, whoops, I just scratched my itch there, didn't I? When you make the unskillful choice, you actually know that that's going to lead to suffering, which is going to lead to more suffering because you want to do it again.
I was thinking how unfortunate it is that a lot of our emotions are so strong that they bubble up without us being able to find a gap. So it's all very well in meditation, but you know, something like anger or irritation, it's like it's like a spark that just suddenly erupts because we're not aware enough.
Well, it is like that, yes, but I think the more you practice, whatever you do in meditation, you know, that awareness carries over into the rest of your life. So that actually, in time, you will be at a point where you do have the awareness. Oh, anger is arising. What do I do now? That will come about, and then you can, at least attempt to make a choice. Maybe you can't do it first time or second time, but eventually you will be able to.
So those three lakshanas, those aspects of conditionality, that are inevitably there. You know, that life is unsatisfactory ultimately, that it is impermanent, and that everything is insubstantial. In a way, we have choice, don't we, about how we orient towards those truths. You know, we can resist them, or basically we can not resist them. You know, we can see that it's no good fighting how things really are. So there's no limit to, well, how the Dharma can help us. It's just a change in perspective, really, isn't it? That's all it is. If we come down to rock bottom, it's like nirvana is to be found within samsara, simply because it's in our mind. It's what we do with our mind. Perhaps that's a place to end, Bodhivajra.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good place.
So goodbye from both of us.
Bye.
Bye.